Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fortmaster, and welcome to a new reaction. This is, who is the Shadow Mantle holder and why does it matter to Deltarune? Now, this is a video by Lukia, and this was suggested to me by Gudomat in my Discord server. So, that is kind of the question though, because, I mean, everybody jokes that, it's John Mantle and stuff like that, but I mean, what is that little thing you fight to get the Shadow Mantle? Because it's seemingly it knows Chris, and it certainly has something going on, because again, it has, during its fight, it summons all the little, friends to, fight on its behalf. And seemingly whoever, it is, got the Shadow Mantle after it left King in Chapter 1. So whether it's just like the default, holder of the mantle until it gives it away, and then the mantle comes back when the person that it gave to is no longer worthy or something like that. What? Honestly, again, so many questions, so little answers. And yeah, again, it's one of those things that I really don't actually know that much about, besides the fact, it's an absolute pain to get to, while having to get an S rank in all the boards and stuff like that. So, might as well get into this video, because honestly, I'm very curious to see what they would think and what, evidence they have. But yeah, so, we should probably get this thing started. So, of course, as always, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it yet for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And if you like this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because over 3/4 of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed, and I'd very much like that to change, because my main goal for this year is to hopefully hit 10,000 subscribers, or, get as close to it as possible. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 have been out for a while now, and with that time the community's managed to pull together a lot of new theories concerning a lot of the questions that have been raised. However, since playing both chapters myself, there is one question that has kept me occupied that I don't see too many people asking. Who is this? Seriously, does this thing not strike anyone else as incredibly important? Not only does it hold possession over the Shadow Mantle, but it seems to know Chris quite intimately. Might it be that this character holds a significance to the larger story that we need to uncover? Well, my friends, you may call me Lukia, and today I aim to open a discussion with you all about the Chapter 3 hidden boss's true identity. Firstly, I'll go over everything we know to be true about them so that I know we're all on the same page, before we then move on to discussing who it is and who it isn't. I've seen a couple odd videos about this character, but on the whole, nothing has sparked a lot of conversation. That is what I wish to start with this video. I've read into this guy a ton so that I can present this information to you all, and I hope that someone out there can use this and any ensuing conversation as a starting point for their own theory. If that ends up being the case, then my job is done. However, that's not to say that I'm not confident in my conclusion. This boss, to me, signifies something much more important relating to the themes and story of Deltarune as a whole.
ERAM theory. When angels become demons.
Right, first off, what do we know? In Chapter 3, by achieving S or Z rank in every board of Tenna's game show, you unlock access to a secret room in which you can play a different version of the game that Tenna used to create his boards. In these, you obtain a sword that you use to kill enemies until you're able to break out the bounds of the game and find hidden items and areas. In the final one of these games, this entity reveals itself to Chris, and a fight ensues, after which it gives you the Shadow Mantle. Now, the music that plays right before the entity reveals itself is titled ERAM, and as such, part of the community has attributed that name to the entity by association. Because it has no name at the moment, I will henceforth be referring to that entity as ERAM for convenience. There are several things that we can infer about ERAM from its brief appearance in these games, and these are what I've titled the 5 ERAM truths. Number 1, it has a pre-established relationship with Chris. Number 2, it is connected to device_friend. Number 3, it was able to access the game without RAM being aware or just not telling us. Number 4, it is aware of the events of at least Chapter 2 in both routes. And number 5, whether we've done it or not, ERAM is aware of the weird route. Now, the Mantle game is, according to RAM at least, the original game, and the characters inside it besides Chris are all NPCs. I would argue that this includes Tenna's character, since nothing you do to Tenna or anything he says to you is ever acknowledged by the real Tenna. And I also see little reason why he would be logging into this game while he was trying to find the Fun Gang in the actual TV world.
Yeah, that is kind of weird. I mean, you kind of do forget that there's the whole, thing that they're NPCs and not actual characters, which is weird that, a Darkner is telling you that. But, then how did the NPC Tenna, get that stuff? Again, there's a lot of, magical weirdness going on with the Dark World. So is it, is the NPC Tenna, is that just, an imprint or left behind of, Tenna, when he went to modify the game to, make his version? Or, again, where does the NPC Tenna come from?
For this reason, I feel that we can be sure that ERAM is not any of the Chapter 3 Darkners. Even Ram, many people's most likely candidate, to me seems unlikely. Yes, you can make the argument, since he also displays a prior relationship with Chris, gives us access to the room in the first place, and is keen to keep the whole thing a secret from Tenna. Not only that, but Ram sees Chris create the fountain, implying that he is at least partially aware of their plan. He also disappears outside the room once ERAM shows its face. However, Ram is petrified before we even start the
yeah, that's kind of important,
sequence,
yeah.
Meaning it's unlikely that he would be able to crush us in Zelda. Also, if you...
Unless that means that would mean Ram was, playing one-handed the entire time. And, from what little experience I do have with, those older consoles, yeah, that's kind of hard.
Don't do the final game. We see Ram completely turned to stone. As well as this, I find that since he's just a cable that Chris used to play with, it's unlikely that he would be aware of whether or not Chris has done the weird route. Ram...
Was he a cable or, a power strip?
...is also prominently from Her Majesty's Kingdom of Great Britannia, which conflicts with how ERAM talks. At best, one could assert that Ram was in collusion with ERAM in some capacity, depending on who it is. As to why Ram is so eager to see Chris have some real fun, I mean, this may just be that there is some truth to what ERAM is saying when it says that a part of Chris enjoys the weird route. It also links to the idea of Ram being connected to freedom in the same way as the other secret bosses, and other characters have mentioned Chris's prior violent tendencies after all. But okay, all of these characters being NPCs does not necessarily mean that ERAM's character is not being controlled by anyone in this scene. It seems that this game's relationship with the world becomes a little twisted by this point, as ERAM is able to physically hurt the real Chris, as well as...
Well, again, okay, so that is always very tricky, because, again, with any of these mini-games, you always see that, at the beginning, it's always, the soul always appears on screen before, the mini Chris is overlaid over it. So, that, I don't see that, well, I mean... I don't see, that, the stuff in-game is able to hurt Chris as being weird. I see the weird part as, the soul itself being able to go into the game, it being the weird part.
As Chris being able to cross into the game world to get the mantle.
That definitely is also weird, though.
ERAM is an NPC, though. We've seen that all the other NPCs represent Undertale characters in some way, so who or what ERAM represents continues to be relevant. So, if it's not a Darkner, then who is it then? Well, to be honest, I don't really think that there are many Lighteners that are likely to be ERAM either, given the relationship that Chris and ERAM have. ERAM is shown to be in some sort of superior role to Chris, talking down to them and mocking them. Not only that, but the S-Rank games show Chris and Noelle being used up, implying that Chris, or indeed the soul, since it only says you were used up, is being used by ERAM for some purpose. As I see it, there are only 2 Lighteners that we've met that could fit this description. Let's talk about ERAM's connection to Carol and the Knight. Now okay, when I say the Knight, I am making the assumption that it's December holiday. Look, it's entirely possible that Carol is the Knight, but 1, the evidence swings a lot more in favour of it being Des, and I don't want this video to become a Des is the Knight video. And 2, even if the Knight was Carol, for the purposes of this theory, her role doesn't really change an awful lot. So I think it's just easier to assume that she is just working with the Knight, or is working with Chris to find the Knight. Much of what I have to say about her remains the same either way. So, what connection does ERAM have to the Knight and Carol? After playing through Chapter 3 for the first time, the Knight was actually my first contender for ERAM's identity after playing through the Mantle sections, thanks to its theme, Burning Eyes. you'll quickly notice that its percussion and bass line are almost exactly the same as the Knight's theme, Black Knife. Here, I'll do a comparison for you.
Oh yeah, that's very similar. God, yeah, that is really similar. Okay. And I mean, looking at it, like, they are, granted, like, very similar just design-wise. I mean, not specifics, but, like, again, black shapes with white outlines. Really, the biggest difference between them is the fact that, you know, ERAM's face, mouth, visor, whatever you want to call it, is red, while the Knight's visor is just white.
It's uncanny, right? Besides that, they both share a relation to darkness, the character hidden behind the curtain exists, and the fact that there are a couple of secret areas that ERAM talks in the earlier Mantle segments all made me think that it was the Knight monitoring Chris, due to the fact that the text is written in the same darkness that envelops ERAM. Past that though, I'd say there is far more compelling counter-evidence for the Knight being ERAM than evidence for it.
Okay, Carol, hi.
In a similar vein, I don't believe that Carol is ERAM either. However, in exploring the possibility, I found there to be a startling amount of things that correlate, leading me to believe that there is a relationship there worth uncovering. The goal of this section is more so to assert that Carol and ERAM are, while not the same person, connected or allied in some way. Carol, of course, naturally suits being in a superior role, being the mayor of Hometown.
Yeah,
her relationship
definitely.
with every character that she interacts with puts her in a place of authority or power over the other person. This naturally extends to Noelle, who she is stated to be severely overbearing with in restricting her. Now, this may easily just be her being protective, but equally, it might be preparing Noelle for some event in the future. The end of Weirdroot certainly seems to suggest that Carol is in some way okay with the results of Weirdroot, whatever they may be. Either she is not aware, or she just doesn't care that her child has been traumatized by the person she's currently calling, at the very least, because these are not the words of a concerned parent. I'd be
God, that's a really creepy and scary line of thought there. Like, again, like, it's been pointed out how many times, you know, how creepy the Weirdroot can be, or just disturbing. So the idea that potentially Carol might just be okay with us, or Chris, doing that, God, that is disturbing. Ugh. And here I was, like, I was going to make a joke. It's like, oh, Carol's a gamer, but no, I can't do that anymore. Ugh.
be surprised if she wasn't aware though, because in the main story at least, she is implied to be working with Chris. Firstly, Chris is let into the bunker, a place where only the Knight, Undyne and Carol are explicitly stated or shown to currently have access to. She also tells Chris that they, or indeed the Soul, are welcome at her home at any time. This, of course, seems to betray some sort of higher awareness about what's actually happening.
Yeah.
It is possible to suggest, therefore, that the scene of Noelle and Chris being used up in the game suggests something relating to Carol's superiority over both of them. It may be that the Weirdroot is something that Carol wants to happen. Despite their motivations overlapping, however, Carol is unlikely to be ERAM for a few reasons. One, it's not really clear how Carol could come to possess such extensive knowledge of Weirdroot by herself. It's also unlikely that she witnessed the events of Chapter 2, Weirdroot or not, and nor is there anything suggesting her to have stolen the Shadow Mantle from Shorm in Chapter 1. So okay, why bring Carol up at all then? Well, it's still true that Carol shares a lot of traits and motivations with ERAM, right? It seems like they're after the same thing, so what if they were somehow in allegiance with each other? To elaborate on that, we will have to finally address this video's main question. Who is ERAM? Who could feasibly have a controlling or superior relationship with Chris, be related to Friend, appear in and potentially manipulate the Mantle game, potentially be aware of the events of Chapter 2, and be motivated to push Chris towards the Weirdroot? Well, certainly no one that we've met so far. But what if it was someone that we've heard of before? It is my conclusion, dear friends, that ERAM is a demon. A couple of times in the game so far,
Demon.
we've heard about Chris and Catty summoning a demon in the past. ERAM is that demon. It is likely to have a pre-established relationship with Chris, and thanks to being some sort of eldritch horror, would likely be connected to Friend. Yeah, quick editor's note. I just wanted to put this video here by Guilty Flygon that was released just a couple of days after I finished this script. It makes some great connections between Friend and ERAM that strengthen my theory quite a lot. They make a lot of similar points to me in regards to ERAM, but they come to quite a different conclusion that's focused a bit more on the metaphorical side of things. So if you're looking for another perspective on ERAM, that's a great video to watch. Anyway, back to things.
May have to look at that.
They both seem to be playing similar roles in the story, and being incorporeal would also allow it to be present in the Mantle games without Rams knowing, as well as allowing it to follow us throughout the prior chapters. If you want some evidence of this, that is the Shadow Mantle.
Yeah,
suddenly
I know.
Flying away while King is weak. If we are to assume that the Shadow Mantle is not a sentient being as proved by this line, then this would be explained by the fact that it is indeed a demon stealing the Shadow Mantle. Since Ram didn't notice anyone coming in or leaving the room, the demon being able to conceal themselves tracks. Now,
you know, the whole, like, Chris and Catty summoning a demon thing. I remember, I think I've talked about it before, but I remember coming across this comic somebody made where, like, they talked about, where, like, the whole, like, point of the comic, or the plot of the comic was that, yes, they did actually summon a demon, but, you know, the player was the demon, and they ended up possessing them. So, the idea that, you know, again, they actually did summon a demon, but we'd only be hearing about it really now? Like, what would its purpose be? Because, honestly, in the whole point of the game, like, that's coming really out of left field. Like, I mean, the beginning of at the beginning of the video, they said, you know, what was it, like, when an angel becomes a demon or something? So, the potential that ERAM is the angel? Somehow? Is that how is this where this is going to go?
of course I understand that this is all circumstantial and doesn't necessarily confirm that ERAM is a demon. However, much of the evidence for this theory is based in the imagery surrounding ERAM. During the last phase of ERAM's fight, the background changes to this, a swarm of familiar eyes on a red backdrop. All of this, while ERAM spits an onslaught of fire at you as well as charging at you in a ball of fire. Obvious, hellish imagery aside, this is also potentially what the name Burning Eyes may in fact be referencing. This directly links ERAM to imagery of hell and demons. This door that we need to get in order to fight ERAM is also bordered by demon horns, alike the ones that we are told Chris used to wear. Not only does this strengthen ERAM's connection to demons, but to Chris specifically as well. In this case, ERAM's relationship with Chris suddenly begins to make a bit more sense. The fight also takes place in the game version of the Shelter, a place that deathly terrifies everyone in Hometown and where something awful is supposed to have happened in the past. Chris is terrified of it and even resists us going inside the game version of the Shelter, likely because of ERAM based on their relationship. This could link to a couple of things shown in Deltarune Chapter 4. In this room with all the windows, if you go behind the window that leads you to the egg room, you find this room. In this room, you find a man that says the following words. When unscrambled, they read, "Lost where the forest would grow. The children followed the pointed tail. The poor children." Not only this, there is a prophecy elsewhere that reads, "They'll see the tail of hell take cruel."
Again, so in a relatively recent video that I did a reaction to, I'm forgetting which one it was. I think it was, Spooky Dude. What was it? What is the demon cat and pointed tail? Yeah, I kind of theorized that what if this whole thing is talking about Friend, as in, friend, cat, pointed tail, and, Friend was somehow responsible for, deaths disappearing or dying or whatever happened to her. And, I mean, smile. Again, this is so many competing theories right now.
If we couple this with the Roots prophecy that shows up in the same room, something is clearly implied to have taken place in the forest. Of course, the Shelter is also in the forest. At this point, it would be safe to assume that the tail of hell is the demon. Is
textual.
ERAM.
Oh no. Since writing the script, the common theory has emerged that the tail is friend, since the two are undeniably connected. I didn't find this distinction too important. It could be either, though, in actual fact. I find it likely that friend will likely just end up acting as an extension of ERAM's will, considering how it is summoned during the Mantle fight. Yeah, I mean, that definitely does make sense. I mean, the whole thing with, friend being connected to cats. I mean, cats have tail, who's to say?
If this were true, this would explain Asgore losing his job as a result of Dess's disappearance. If Dess disappeared and was cursed somehow by this demon and became the knight, how is Asgore supposed to explain that? Of course he'd lose his job, right? And it's clear, if you look in the basement of Flower King, you see a corkboard that Asgore seemingly obsesses over. It's clear that he wants the truth to come out, but he just hasn't been able to prove it and has lost all credibility as a result. It would seem that there is something hidden in the forest, something that now may be potentially hidden in the shelter. And if it is true that the knight, Dess, somehow has been affected by this demon, then that would explain everything.
And, I mean, thinking about it, that also may connect to the whole thing why Carol, supports Asgore. Like, while everybody else is kind of looking at it, it's like, why does she do that? Maybe if Carol is, either working with the knight or ERAM or whoever this works out, maybe she's stringing him along, saying like, oh, I believe you, and I'll help you and stuff like this. And that's how it's going to end up being, Chapter 5 takes place in the flower shop. Huh.
Okay, so I think I've painted a pretty good picture up to this point that ERAM is the demon. If you will all indulge me, before I get to how this connects to the wider themes of Deltarune, I would like to enter the realm of speculation for a bit. With all of this information in the air, it got me thinking about some other areas of the game that have me stumped. Such as, for example, some more things about Carol Holiday. Firstly, why, if we are to believe that this voice on the phone is Carol, do we hear her voice unambiguously at the end of Chapter 4's Weird Route? By this point, we are all aware that Toby Fox is very particular about the way that he presents information to us. He would not make this distinction if it did not matter. Well, part of why I discussed Carol and ERAM's similarities earlier was to highlight how similar their dynamic with Chris appears. And so I ask you, my friends, what if this voice is not Carol, but ERAM? It certainly would not be the first time that someone in this universe has had a phone call with some sort of ambiguously higher entity. And while we're on that topic, we don't know who Spamton had that phone call with. We can make the assumption that it's Garster, but who did Spamton even get the Thorn Ring from? Could it be that he was actually on the phone to ERAM? Admittedly, there is not a huge amount of evidence to suggest that the phone guy, as I'm calling them, is ERAM, but
the ultimate, Deltarune FNAF crossover. Wow, did not see that one coming.
likewise, the only evidence that we have that it's Carol is circumstantial. However, ERAM and Chris's dynamic in the game would make even more sense if it turned out that they were actually in a kind of correspondence with each other, where Chris is being forced against their will to do ERAM's bidding. Sound familiar? Sound familiar?
You promised.
My point is, a deal with the devil would complement Deltarune's themes of choice very well. While this is an interesting thing to think about, it doesn't confirm that ERAM and Carol's similarities are a sign that they're connected. This leads me to the next thing that's got me thinking. Why does Carol own so many of these heart pillows that when you click on them say that they look soul-shaped depending on who you ask? Why also is there dialogue that says that Chris has used these to simulate ripping their heart out in the past? Why does Carol call Chris you in red, as if to imply that she's talking about the soul? Why does Des have loads of these pillows in her closet? If I were to speculate, I would hazard a guess that it's connected to how Chris's soul is presented throughout the game. Before Chapter 3, the running theory for the demon was that it was the soul, it was the player. And I mean, it makes sense, right? Considering all the parallels
considering we're literally possessing Chris right now.
Would it not make sense to assume that the two are more similar than they seem? In fact, following the idea that ERAM is the person on the phone who speaks about the soul, what if we go one step further? What if this voice at the beginning of the game, who shunts us into Chris's body, was ERAM? I mean, before Chapter 3, people were arguing that it could be Kara, you know, the famous demon of the genocide route. Of course, while I'm certainly not saying that Kara in any way exists in Deltarune, the similarities between them in this context feel worthwhile to point out, at least in the effort to paint a more vivid picture of ERAM's role in the story. If everything else that I've said about ERAM is true, it would also make sense if ERAM was the reason why Chris is burdened with the soul and why they're doing what they're doing. All of this to say that if Carol is aware of the soul, then did she implant this idea in Chris? Did Chris want to summon a demon because Carol planted the idea in their head? Or has ERAM been around a lot longer than we thought? In any case, under this theory, it's not impossible to suggest that the person that she is working with in the bunker is not the knight, but ERAM. Hi. Looking this over in post, I don't think I really explained this point fully, so let me just clarify what I'm trying to say here. Essentially, due to the soul being presented in a demonic sort of way, what with possessing Chris and causing them to equip the Thorn Ring to Noelle and all that, ERAM sharing some sort of connection to the soul would explain the similarities that they have to the soul in terms of their presentation. Following this, if ERAM has any sort of influence over where the soul goes, and if it was indeed the person on the phone who both speaks to Chris and, under this theory, Spamton, the person who provides us with the Thorn Ring, this firmly establishes that ERAM's goal is the weird root. Since Carol is also aware of the soul and acts strangely in the weird root, you could suggest that she also shares this goal for some reason that hasn't yet been explained. This would also explain why her and Chris are working together, and this takes even more autonomy away from Chris in a way that thematically suits the narrative. Why is she doing this? If I know. But if I were to guess, you could explain her actions as her wishing to save Des by any means necessary from the fate that ERAM caused her in some way. This...
Okay. And I mean, I guess that could also, you know, go into, again, another video that I remember watching, I can't remember who it was by, they were talking about how it's seemingly, you know, the plot or, you know, overarching message of Deltarune is learning to let go. And also not get attached to, you know, fictional characters, seemingly. Because, you know, Rousey points out, you know, the Darkners are not real and stuff like that in Chapter 3. And, you know, why don't you forget about us to make some real friends? Again, what a line right there. And as a mirror of that, seemingly, you know, Carol working so hard to get her daughter back may cause the end of the world, seemingly. Oh, God.
This fate is a point that I will come back to later. Well, now that we've named the demon's accomplices, the question after all of that is, what place does a demon have in a prophecy about banishing the angels' heaven? The Titans share the eyes that appear behind ERAM in its fight, but otherwise, they're wholly connected to the imagery of angels. What gives? Well, I did some research into these eyes and their symbolism, and I found two important links to religious imagery. Firstly, and I'd say probably most obviously, is the Eye of Providence or the All-Seeing Eye, which is a common symbol in multiple cultures and religions that acts as a reminder that God is always watching over mankind. Of course, right off the bat, we can make some pretty surface level connections to ERAM being able to say that they can see in the dark, Garster overseeing this entire project, the concept of the angel or the player watching over everything. This concept could be connected to various people in the game, not least of all ERAM. Interestingly, however, the symbol has largely been homogenized by groups such as the Freemasons and the Illuminati, and it's more often associated nowadays with more conspiratorial or blasphemous contexts.
Yeah.
Such a dichotomy is clear here with the presentation of the Titans and the Angels' Heaven. The prophecy and the game itself makes out that the Titans are the most unambiguously evil creatures alongside the angel, but at the same time uses divine imagery to represent them. This is of course most recently evident at the end of Chapter 4, where we fight a Titan who's wrapped in angelic wings, and yet we have to banish it with the power of the soul's light, because it's incapable of understanding mercy. Not only that, but one of the first things that we see from the Titan is an eye appearing out of its hand. Now, this is of course relatively common imagery in video games, but its origin lies in Islam and Judaism as a symbol called the
Really?
Hamza. This symbol also appears in some Christian cultures as the Hand of Mary, but unanimously, It is a symbol of divine protection. In its original context, the Hamza is also a symbol used to protect from something called the evil eye, which is the idea that one could be cursed if looked upon malevolently by someone else. Also, I don't think this is particularly relevant to ERAM, but just as a tangent, while I was researching this, I came upon
the
this
eyes
Reddit
do
thread
appear
which
a
highlighted
lot.
the connection Toriel's carpet and Undertale and Deltarune have to eyes. And when you look at that, these two symbols fit perfectly.
That I never noticed before. Wow, okay. Yeah, okay, I've never noticed that before. That's kind of creepy. Though then again, thinking about it, I mean, that could actually make more sense. I mean, because, like, Toriel's always been depicted as being, you know, a more religious member of, you know, the community. So, I mean, and, you know, their religion, while not, you know, Christian, well, obviously, is like, it's depicted as having a lot of, you know, similarities with it. At least, you know, in the way that it's at least in the way you worship and, like, the way the church is and stuff like that. So, I mean, it would make sense that, you know, as a more religious member of the community, like, to have, you know, the holy symbols more places. Like, I mean, like, I know the stereotype for, you know, for, like, really Catholic households is having, like, crosses and crucifixes everywhere. So who's to say that this eye isn't, you know, their religion's version of the cross or something like that, as you know, the symbol of their god, the angel. So having the eye in more places, yeah, okay, I could definitely see it. Okay.
I have no idea what this means, but if anyone has any ideas, please let me know in the comments. I'm begging you, I really want to know. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. In any case, what is with this mismatch of divine and hellish imagery when discussing the Titans and ERAM? Well, one of the other main things that ERAM is connected to is the shadow crystals, right?
Yeah.
If the knight, who may have been cursed by the demon, also gives you a shadow crystal, then where do the other bosses fit in? Jevil is represented by the devil's knife. Spamton, who talks of heaven, represents a fallen angel who wishes to ascend once more. Gerson is a man who neglected his shadow crystal, and therefore achieved true freedom. Therefore, by collecting these crystals, we are seemingly being aligned with the side of demons. What could this mean for Deltarune as a whole, with the themes of choices and freedom? Well, if you just bear with this theory a little longer, I think I have an answer for this as well. This scene, after you fight the Titan in Chapter 4, powerfully shows Susie shattering the prophecy that Rousey didn't want us to see, before saying that none of them would let that happen. We do not get to see this, but it's implied that whatever it is will result in tragedy. This is a moment of great development for Susie, who starts out this game by saying your choices don't matter. One of the main types of people that I hear use this phrase are nihilists. And of course, nihilism is the ideology that nothing matters, because everyone dies no matter what choices you make. I feel an obvious connection here is to be made to the themes of Deltarune, especially when discussing how the game may potentially end. If Deltarune truly is to have one ending, despite how much we are incentivized to make our own choices, that suggests to me that the prophecy was foretelling a major character death. Like in many faiths, the one ending is that we die. But the choices that we make along the way result in us going to some variation of either heaven or hell. Such a distinction may be what we're looking at in terms of Deltarune's vast amount of choices. The ending will be the same, but everything around it will be affected by our choices. ERAM seems to have haunted Hometown in some way for a long time. It has taken Des from the town either by death or by turning her into the night, and has taken Chris's autonomy from them in multiple aspects. If we, the Soul, go against them and continue to fight on the side of Rousey and Susie? If we, the Soul, go against them and continue to fight on the side of Rousey and Susie, then it may be that we're looking at ERAM becoming a major endgame boss in some way. How that fight ends may depend on our progress with the Shadow Crystals, but either way, by ERAM's hand or by someone else's, there will be a death.
So, I mean, just thinking about it, I mean, again, there is the whole thing with, like, the twisted sword and, you know, that whole theory that I watched about, you know, the shadow crystals. But thinking about it, like, the idea, I mean, I doubt that the fight would be made literally impossible if you didn't have the shadow crystals. I mean, the night battle was supposed to be, the third secret boss was supposed to be impossible if we didn't have the shadow mantle. Yet here you go, people, have gone complete no-hit runs just to fight without the shadow mantle. So it's not impossible unless, Toby specifically codes it in, saying it's if you don't have all 5 or whoever there are, you physically can't do damage to it or something. So, this is gonna be weird.
I don't think we have enough pieces to fully explain what sort of role ERAM would play in Endgame, but I would suggest it to be either that the pro-prophecy team that Carol, Chris and the Knight seem to be a part of would be spearheaded by ERAM to serve as the main harbinger of the prophecy, or that ERAM is itself the angel that we need to banish, which plays with the dichotomy between angels and demons even further. This could also explain why Noelle is so linked to angelic imagery, considering how ERAM may connect to the weird root.
Actually, another thing I'm thinking about here. So I've made it no secret that one of my favorite things I'd want to see was us gaining, the body we created at the beginning of the game again at some point. Now, initially, I had hoped that it would be, during some part where we get separated from Chris, we get it, and we're able to actually talk with them and get them on our side or something like that. But the idea that you could have, this pro-prophecy faction of, Carol the Knight, ERAM, and potentially Chris, even if they are there under duress. That final battle, the idea that, oh man, we'd have to fight Chris, we don't want to fight, and we're, split off from Chris because at this point they don't need us anymore, or whatever. And then at that point, we gain control, we gain, the body we designed at the beginning of the game, and now we're fighting alongside, Susie and Rousey, trying to convince Chris to, forget, Carol and the Knight, help them to stop the prophecy and stuff like that. Ooh, that's an idea right there. Ooh.
Noelle. But what if there was a way to subvert the prophecy? And if there were such a way, would it only end up resulting in a worse outcome? Rousey has this sentiment during Chapter 4's Weird Root, a root which is the embodiment of something that you feel like you're not supposed to have found. Why would ERAM, a demon who is also potentially the angel, want us to do this route? Well, in a typical deal with the devil situation, if we are going down this route to stop the knife growing dull, perhaps there is a way for us to subvert this death, but at a cost. Chapter 4 sees us seemingly implanting a bit of the soul into Noelle, or perhaps transporting another soul from the Thorn Ring. Either way, by introducing a new vessel into the equation, this would enable ERAM to pursue even greater heights than what it hopes to achieve in the normal route. As it seems, December may have evaded death by becoming the Knight at great cost to herself, losing her sense of self and her freedom. Who is not to say that by selling our soul to the demon in the weird route, or indeed by selling Noelle, that is how we do the same, at perhaps an even greater cost.
Okay, thinking about it. Going back to my whole hope / idea that, we get, we control we fight Chris and the others, in the Goner body we designed. It always says, the human of the prophecy is said to be, a cage of human soul and parts and, all that. What if it's death? What if it is in the prophecy that, the human will die in the prophecy? Rousey's made it clear several times that they, at the very least, believe that the prophecy cannot be subverted or stopped in any way. And whenever you try, it will just happen anyway. So, what if, it's said in the prophecy that, one of the members, the girl has to kill the human or whatever. And, with us, potentially, being in a Goner body, a cage of human parts, why not have Susie kill the Goner, fulfill the prophecy, and, put everything right, without having Chris having to be harmed in the slightest? I mean, at this point, it's literally all conjecture and fan fiction at this point, but that could be If that actually happened, that would be so fun. That would be so good.
That is ERAM's significance to Deltarune, in my honest opinion at least. Of course, a lot of this is speculation on my part, but the more that I dug into this theory, the more that it all just slotted into place. If one of these things ends up being true, then everything around it just begins to make a lot more sense. But what do you think? I would love to see people's interpretations of this theory, and indeed ERAM in general, and if I get enough discussion in the comments, I would love to do a follow-up video on this. If anyone has any new evidence or counter-evidence, I would love to discuss it, so that together we may further our pursuit in the identity of this little bat thing as a community. There have been a lot more of you around than usual, which I've loved, so it would make my day if you stuck around and subscribed and left a like, just so that I know that this is what I should be doing. I've been Luke here, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all soon. Toodaloo.
Okay, so thinking about it, just thinking about it, I also just had another idea. So the whole thing with, the potential, my idea of, the goner body being the one that's killed in the human's place to fulfill the prophecies that stuff actually happens. Like, I just thought of something. You ever seen that old clip of George Lucas when he's talking about, like, the prequels and the original trilogy of Star Wars, where it's like, oh, it rhymes and stuff like that? What if that kind of thing is also kind of goes on here? Because, at the beginning, we're forced into Chris and, we take control of them against their will. So what if, after the point, we sacrifice the goner body, we have the chance to move on, finish the game as it were, and, as a sort of rhyming thing, we get the chance to, control or get back into Chris, but this time it's with their blessing. They allow us into their body. Now, I don't know whether that would be permanent or just a temporary thing until, the game officially ends and we, pass on to our next great adventure or whatever. But I could see some poetic, some poetry in motion, as it were, going on there. Again, very interesting. Again, the thought of, ERAM potentially actually being the angel of prophecy all this time, and actually being like a demon that was summoned or something, like, that is definitely a very interesting idea. But yeah, so I mean, Lukia, you definitely earned a subscription from me. I'll tell you that. And yeah, that's definitely going to be it for me for now. So yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.